So here's the issue. The issue is that these are emotionally complex moments. Remember our thesis question. We're wondering, are there a few moments that matter more than any others? And time again, we found that there are moments defined by three dimensions that have a disproportionate effect on the durability of your marriage, the happiness of your marriage, the strength of your executive team, the performance of your organization in executing on its mission. And these are those dimensions. First, these are moments where there's some issue that's very high stakes to you. Second, you come into these moments expecting somebody else to disagree with you. That causes you to behave differently than you otherwise would. And finally, these are moments of strong emotion, triggered emotions. So those three dimensions, high stakes, opposing opinions, strong emotions, cause these moments to be different than any other. And the effect of how you behave in those moments carries on long past that moment. Let me back you up to the moment that we just watched. So we did research in healthcare environments, among many other industries. And let me ask you for just a second to speculate on that interaction between Nurse Bonnie and Dr. Scott. How many of you think that the way that plays out could profoundly affect Nurse Bonnie's satisfaction with her job? How many of you think it would? Yeah. So this is a no-brainer. But let's be even more interesting here. How many of you think that could also affect, let's say, patient safety? How many of you think it could? How many of you think it could affect trust in an entire team? How many of you think, yeah? Because this leaks out, right? That story travels. Now, here's a more complicated one. How many of you think it could affect physician satisfaction? How many of you think that? Yeah, our research shows, in fact, it does. Because how that plays out will come back to Dr. Scott as well, not just Nurse Bonnie. It gets complicated. Here's what I want you to do. For just a moment, I want you to think of the name of somebody about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Now, if it's somebody you're seated next to, pick another one just for the moment. But think of the name of somebody about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Think about it. Could be a customer, supplier, could be a boss, direct report, could be a spouse, could be a child, could be a neighbor. Doesn't matter. Think of somebody. Raise your hand if you can think of somebody. Don't point at them. Just raise the hand. Good. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that we have concerns and challenges, problems with other people. The challenge becomes how we handle them. See, here's the issue. What we know from our research is this. The big idea here, the first big idea I want to share, is that anytime you find yourself stuck with a chronic problem in a relationship, a team, or an organization, anytime you're not reaching the potential of your performance as an organization or a team, or the potential of a relationship, there are always crucial conversations we're either not holding or not holding well. That's the principle. The diagnostic principle for us as leaders is when we find we're not achieving our potential to step back and ask, what's the crucial conversation we're either not holding or not holding well? To present it graphically, let's take a look at this. So I want you to imagine this is you. Now, the way life works is that as you're walking along and moving towards some super awesome goal, something you'd like to achieve, that's when problems begin. Many of us wish that we could create a life where we had fewer crucial conversations. How many of us would like that? Wouldn't you like to have fewer? The best way to do that is to have a meaningless life. So as soon as you give up on super awesome goals and don't care about missions and visions and things like that, you have a lot fewer crucial conversations. But as soon as you start caring about something, then something else starts to happen. Let me describe it with an experience that I had. So I've written collaboratively with my partners over the past 24 years. One of them, Carrie Patterson, and myself work together a lot. We have a process we use. One or the other of us will write the first draft of a chapter, and then we send it to the other for rewrites. And then we set up a time to talk and give each other feedback. That's the process. So at one point, Carrie had taken first draft on a chapter. He sent it to me. I did some very aggressive rewrites. I emailed it to him. It's now 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening. We've scheduled a time to talk. So I called him. He picks up the phone. I said, hey, Carrie, now a good time? Yeah, now's a good time. I said, did you get the chapter back? He said, I did. I said, what did you think? He said, you ruined it. I said, I didn't ruin it. I fixed it. He said, you didn't fix it. It's now all disjointed. It goes from A to C to B, and it doesn't work anymore. Now, did you time that? How long did that take? How long did that take? It took 4 seconds for the conversation to go from casual to crucial. Now, the irony here is that conversation took place while we were writing Crucial Conversations. It was high stakes. It was very important emotionally to us. We had opposing opinions coming in. And finally, that provoked an emotional response from it. When conversations turn from casual to crucial, the irony is that when it matters most, you and I tend to do our worst. And that's why these moments matter so much. So I want you to think for just a moment about that person about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Then turn to your partner. All I want you to do is share one brief thing. Don't tell them who it is. Don't give them background. I don't want you to disclose inappropriate information. All I want you to do is share the answer to this question. How is it affecting your behavior? Give one example of how you're behaving differently towards that person because of the concerns you have with them. Take 30 seconds. Just share one example. Okay, good. How many of you could see at least one example of how it's affecting your behavior? How many of us could see that? Very good. If you can't see it yet, keep looking, keep watching. Now, here's the most important question. How many of you could see that the way you're behaving probably isn't helping? Can any of you see that? Yeah, here's the point. If it's not possible to have fewer crucial conversations without just having a meaningful life, then the point here is we're going to confront them. Along our journey to some super awesome goal, they will always occur, and there's nothing wrong with that. Life is working fine. In fact, I believe there's a God-ordained purpose to crucial conversations. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But once you come to them, you have only 2 options. You can talk it out. That's an option. You can talk it out. You can find a way to absolutely honestly and absolutely respectfully share your concerns. You can try to find that way. But for the most part, we don't talk it out. If you don't talk it out, you don't get to vote on whether you do the second thing. You will do it. If you don't talk it out, you will act it out. It will show up in your behavior, and that will provoke behavior in response. And it always gets worse. Talk it out or act it out are the only 2 options available. Now, just since many of us don't have full-time work in a church environment, I thought, well, I wonder if there are crucial conversations in church leadership. What do you think? Possibly. Well, a few hundred folks were kind enough to participate in a little study with us of churches. We asked the question, are there some crucial conversations you're facing now? Here's some typical responses. A staff member is too old to continue in position. There's the precipice, right? So we're working towards the super awesome goal of this wonderful faith community that inspires and exalts all of its constituents. And then we confront a problem. Or top givers and influential volunteer leaders are performing terribly in their positions. There it is. There's nothing wrong with that happening. The question is, how do we behave once we get to that place? Leadership decided to close the daycare center and lay off staff. A board member told me he's not giving at all. So we have these concerns, we have these frustrations with each other. Now, in the course of our research, as we were studying organizations, studying leadership, studying teams, my children were getting older. We have a small organization called the Grenny family. We have 6 children, 3 control, 3 experimental. That's good research base. My wife and I believe that sample size is the key to good research. So, as our children were getting older, various of them had science fair projects they had to do. I tried to interest the older ones into doing social science type projects, and they weren't really interested in that. Finally, along comes Samuel. And Samuel one day has a science fair project due. I said, what are you thinking of doing? He says, I want to put little kids in some uncomfortable circumstance and then see how they behave. And at first I was a little discouraging of it. I said, I don't know if any of you have seen the old show, Kids Say the Darndest Things, right? But I said, kids don't have the same kind of social constraints that adults do. He goes, no, I know what I want to do. He says, just help me with the experiment. So I want to play for you the experiment, and then we'll talk about its implications.
We all know adults stink at talking about tough things, but how about little kids? Here's my experiment. Feed kids wretched brownies, then see if they'll tell you the truth, especially when they think it might hurt your feelings. First, I made the brownies. Lots of chocolate, eggs and flour, but instead of sugar, I put in salt. Lots of salt. There's no way they could like these better. Now I recruit kids of various ages for a taste test. I tell them I want to compare ordinary brownies to my special brownies. My dear grandmother's special recipe. My dear dead grandmother's special recipe. Then I give them $1 for being such a big help. My parents always taught me that if you want someone to like you, give them money. Okay, here goes. First, they ate the yummy sugar brownies. Next, they eat the salt bricks. Watch this girl. She can hardly keep from gagging. And now for the crucial moment. Will they tell me the truth and possibly offend me? I asked them to point to the brownies they like best. No surprise that some tried to spare my feelings. But watch, even the one who gagged? And how about really little kids? But do you want to know what they really thought? Here, guys, I have leftovers. Does anybody want seconds? Isn't
that amazing? I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. Now, different than you, when my wife and I watched this, it's a different experience because the subjects are neighbor kids, right? That little girl whose face was all retching up, she lives right next door to us. Her name is Hannah. She's the most blunt, outspoken girl in the world. And she's lying about the brownies. Now, here's the question. How many of us have been to that meeting? Have you been in that meeting before? How many of us been in a meeting where everybody knows that the brownies suck? But nobody's saying it. And if they do say it, where do they say it? Where do they say it? It's in the hallway after the meeting. That's where it comes out. Here's the point. Watching this experiment, I realized at what a remarkably young age, you and I draw a horrific conclusion. At about 3 or 4 years old, you and I start to believe a myth that causes mischief for the rest of our lives. It undermines our organizations. It undermines our families and all of our relationships. That myth is this, that you often have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. It's the belief that you have to choose between the two. Truth-telling means losing friends, right? Keeping friends means compromising truth. It's the belief that you have to trade the two off against each other that causes mischief in all our relationships. You can measure the health of a relationship, a team, or an organization by measuring the number of undiscussables. The number of things that you and I believe you just can't talk about. Progress in organizations begins the moment we as leaders start to help people unwind that myth. So, here's what I advocate. Around principle number 1, big idea number 1, the principle of crucial conversations. Your job as a leader is to model, teach, coach, and measure a small number of the crucial conversations that most profoundly affect the mission you're trying to accomplish.